A shipment of gold from Burkina Faso, worth hundreds of millions, didn't just get delayed, it got straight up seized at a European port. No accident, no legal mess. This was politics in its rawest form. Word on the street. Washington had leaned on Europe to make sure those containers never hit their destination. And then, in a voice as sharp as a blade, Trump made it loud and clear. Africa wants global trade? Pay up. When the news hit Ouagadougou, it slammed into President Ibrahim Traoré like a freight train. This wasn't business. This was theft. The gold, dug out by the hands of his people, the wealth meant for schools, hospitals, and food programs, it was frozen as collateral for debts dictated by foreign powers. Crowds hit the streets. Anger moved faster than wildfire. They steal in daylight and call it law, one protester shouted. And he wasn't wrong. If someone could snatch Africa's gold before it left port, sovereignty itself was being tested. But this humiliation didn't crush Traoré. Nah, it lit a fire. One seized shipment had just sparked what would become a battle over Africa's right to shape its own destiny. Washington played it like chess. Trump framed the seizure as a lesson. Africa must honor debts if it wants global market perks. Behind closed doors, officials admitted the real story. The IMF had its hands in the mix. Africa's loans had been shackled with conditions written in Washington and Paris. Payment in dollars, guaranteed by foreign power. Yet African nations were turning heads, eyeing new partners like BRICS and India. And the West, freaking out. What if they bail on our loans? Trump seemed to say. The response was brutal. Hold the gold. Send a clear message. Your resources aren't yours unless you play by our rules. Inside Burkina Faso, the truth hit even harder. Ministers explained to Traoré that the gold had been tagged as security against debts that were often inherited or forced under colonial hangovers. Farmers, teachers, everyday people, they were outraged. We never signed those loans. Why should our gold pay for them? One farmer yelled on local radio. A teacher added, "Keep our gold, and you're keeping our kids' future." Traoré's words to his cabinet were sharp and direct. This ain't about debt. It's about control. If they win, Africa never owns its tomorrow. And while Washington thought they had won, in Burkina Faso, anger morphed into something stronger. Unity. The streets erupted. Radios, WhatsApp, market loudspeakers, everywhere. People questioned, debated, and shouted their outrage. The gold wasn't stolen by pirates. It wasn't a shipping mishap. It was deliberate, tied to the IMF's chains. Mothers cried out in frustration. Youths held signs screaming, "Our gold ain't your guarantee." Betrayal wasn't just a feeling, it was reality. Inside the palace, advisors argued. Diplomacy? Maybe. Offer repayment schedules? Possibly. But Traoré, calm, fierce, unshakable. They want us to bow. Pay debts we didn't choose. With gold mined by our blood. If we bend today, we've got nothing left to stand on tomorrow. That hit. The cabinet got it. This wasn't financial. It was about sovereignty itself. Outside, the protests grew. Miners marched from the fields, tools raised like battle flags. Students staged sit-ins. Even soldiers murmured. If they seize gold, what's next? Western media spun it differently. CNN called it instability. European commentators warned of chaos. But in Africa, the story was flipping. People didn't see recklessness, they saw defiance. And Traoré, he smelled opportunity. The gold was gone. The world thought Africa was kneeling, but Traoré was cooking up a plan that could flip the game entirely. Stick around, because what happens next? It ain't just politics, it's a continental wake-up call. The streets of Ouagadougou weren't just noisy, they were electric. Mothers shouted, youths waved banners, miners clanged their tools like a warning bell. The seizure of Burkina Faso's gold was no accident. It was a message. Collateral for debts. Yeah, debts nobody alive had signed for. This wasn't about law, it was about control. And everyone felt it. Inside the presidential palace, Traoré convened his inner circle. Some ministers, nervous and cautious, suggested trying diplomacy. "We can negotiate," one said. "Offer repayment schedules. Maybe they'll release the gold." But others shook their heads. This wasn't a negotiation. This was coercion. Traoré leaned forward, calm but deadly serious. "They want us to bend. Pay debts we didn't agree to. With gold we mined with our blood. If we bow today, we'll have nothing to stand on tomorrow." Silence filled the room, thick enough to cut. And then the spark of understanding lit the eyes of his cabinet. This wasn't just a financial dispute, it was an attack on Africa's independence. Traoré's words carried weight. "This is about our right to decide our future. They're testing if we'll fold. We won't." Protests grew louder, bolder. Miners marched from the gold fields, tools raised like torches of defiance. University students staged sit-ins, demanding Burkina Faso break free from IMF dependency entirely. Even in the barracks, whispers spread. If they can seize gold, what can't they take next? The sense of betrayal ran deep, but the sense of resolve ran deeper. Meanwhile, Western media tried to spin the narrative. CNN called Traoré reckless. European commentators warned of instability. But inside Africa, the story flipped. This wasn't recklessness. It was courage, defiance, and Traoré knew it. The seizure meant to humiliate Burkina Faso had instead unified a continent. Africa's people were waking up to a truth they had long ignored. Their wealth was being treated as someone else's property. The president's next move was bold. He summoned an emergency session with the alliance of Sahel states. Leaders from Mali, Niger, and beyond sent envoys immediately. The message was simple. Burkina Faso's gold isn't just their fight, it's ours too. Around the table, frustration burned bright. Every nation had stories of frozen shipments, delayed contracts, and reserves suddenly tied to foreign conditions. Traoré's point was crystal clear. They weren't holding gold because of law, they were holding it because it was power. Collateral. Nah, Traoré called it ransom. Heads turned when a Malian minister dared a radical idea. What if we stop sending gold through their ports? Keep it here. Murmurs turned into stunned silence. For the first time, a dream long dismissed as fantasy began to feel possible. An African gold reserve, out of reach of Europe and the IMF, fully controlled by African nations. Outside, momentum was exploding. Protesters weren't just demanding the gold's release, they wanted change. Youth groups painted murals showing gold chained to Western banks, then breaking free. Farmers pledged crops to fund the idea. Western officials laughed. They don't have the unity, the infrastructure, one scoffed. But they underestimated Africa's greatest resource, determination. And at the heart of it all, Traoré, ready to turn a humiliation into the first step toward freedom. The plan was radical, revolutionary, but simple in principle. Stop exporting gold to foreign-controlled ports. Build vaults in Africa. Keep wealth where it belongs. For decades, such an idea had been considered impossible. Now, it was survival. Inside the meeting halls, debate was fierce. Some warned of sanctions, economic collapse, and stalled exports. Fear gripped the room. Traoré cut through it. They've already starved us, frozen our reserves, and controlled our trade. And did it help the people? No. Enough. This time, we guard our own. One by one, support built. Niger, Mali, and others saw the truth. The West didn't care about Africa. It only cared about control. Africa was no longer just reacting, it was planning. And Traoré's next moves would shock the world. The gold wasn't just metal anymore. It was a symbol, a weapon, and a spark for a revolution that couldn't be ignored. The idea was bold, radical, unthinkable for decades. But after the seizure at the European port, it wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a necessity. Burkina Faso's gold had been stolen under the guise of law, and Africa was finally waking up to the fact that no one outside its borders had its back. Traoré wasn't waiting for permission. He was building a plan. Meetings were held in secret. Economic advisors, military chiefs, and engineers huddled over blueprints and ledgers. Vaults were drawn up, massive, secure, and completely within African soil. This was no ordinary storage. Reinforced, monitored, untouchable by foreign hands. Economists crunched numbers, mapping out how Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger could pool resources. Not just gold, uranium, strategic minerals, even harvests. A joint African reserve would protect the continent's wealth from coercion, manipulation, and blackmail. From now on, Traoré said to his advisors, voice steady, we are not digging for Paris or Washington. Every ounce we mine will build Africa's strength, and anyone who tries to take it will have to go through us. His words weren't just a pep talk, they were a call to arms. On the ground, the people responded with unstoppable energy. Youth groups painted murals of gold bars breaking free from chains. Farmers formed cooperatives, ready to back the government with crops, money, and manpower. Even the military, once wary, issued a statement of loyalty. We stand with the people and their chosen leaders. The streets of Ouagadougou and beyond buzzed with determination. This wasn't rebellion, it was empowerment. Western powers didn't take it lightly. European banks began freezing transactions linked to Burkina Faso. Shipping insurance evaporated. Cargo to Asia and elsewhere was halted for security reviews. It was economic warfare dressed up as compliance. Trump, of course, didn't hold back. These young leaders think they can defy the rules, he said. But if Africa wants to play the global trade game, it better learn the rules first. Analysts, newspapers, and think tanks joined the chorus. Headlines warned of famine, chaos, and financial ruin if African leaders didn't fall in line. But for every threat, the people only grew bolder. Viral messages circulated. If they fear it this much, it must be our only hope. Students, farmers, miners, everyone became part of the movement. Meanwhile, Traoré stayed 3 steps ahead. Envoys from BRICS nations quietly arrived in Ouagadougou. Direct offers for gold purchases, refining technology, and trade routes bypassing Europe? Check. A lifeline, not a victory yet, but a chance to prove Africa could play by its own rules. This wasn't charity, it was a strategic counterplay that undercut the West's leverage. Inside the AES summit halls, discussions were fierce. Some ministers warned, break from the IMF and sanctions will crush us. Others pushed forward. We've watched our gold leave our soil for decades, funding banks that don't care about us. If we don't act now, when will we? Traoré listened, then spoke with the clarity that had become his signature. They've already starved us, frozen our wealth, controlled our trade. And where did it get our people? Nowhere. We protect what's ours. No excuses. The idea, once a fantasy, was now strategy. African wealth would be stored and refined on African soil. Security, technology, and governance would be handled internally. For the first time, the continent envisioned a future where it wasn't just a raw material supplier. It was the guardian of its own value. Outside, the momentum was unstoppable. Neighborhoods organized watches to prevent sabotage. Students patrolled campuses, exposing fake opposition groups. Farmers, miners, and citizens became defenders of a shared vision. The gold wasn't just metal, it was a symbol of sovereignty, pride, and defiance. But the West wasn't done. Sanctions, smear campaigns, and covert operations were just getting started. The next moves would test not just Traoré's leadership, but Africa's unity. The fight for control over the continent's future was about to hit the global stage. The West was shaking. They thought freezing gold and cutting off trade would bend Africa to their will. They couldn't have been more wrong. The streets of Ouagadougou were electric, overflowing with chants of "Our gold, our future." Youths, miners, students, and farmers were no longer just protesting, they were organizing. And at the heart of it all, Traoré, calm but unshakable, turning humiliation into a rallying cry for the continent. European banks were in overdrive, freezing accounts and denying insurance. Shipping companies halted gold shipments bound for Asia. Every move screamed, fall in line or starve. Trump didn't mince words either. On live TV, he scolded, "These young leaders think they can rewrite the rules. But Africa has to play by the system or pay the price." Analysts, news outlets, and think tanks joined in, warning of famine, chaos, and instability. But in Africa, the opposite effect was unfolding. The more the West pushed, the stronger the people's resolve became. Traoré knew the stakes. He called his generals and advisors together. "They can starve us, smear us, try to divide us, but they cannot break us unless we let them. This isn't about gold anymore. It's about freedom." And freedom, Africa realized, didn't beg, it fought. Then came the breakthrough that flipped everything. A whistleblower from inside a major European bank leaked internal memos. These documents confirmed what Traoré and his people had long suspected. The seizure wasn't about law or regulations. It was a direct order from Washington, a move to classify African gold as collateral against IMF debts. But it went further. The memos detailed contingency plans to fund opposition groups, spread propaganda, and sabotage the African Gold Reserve Project. One chilling line read, "Without control of their gold, IMF leverage will collapse. This cannot be allowed." The revelation hit the continent like lightning. Newspapers splashed the headline, "Our gold, their debt." Radio waves carried the shock, with callers shouting outrage from Dar es Salaam to Kinshasa. The West could no longer claim neutrality. Coercion was laid bare. And in Ouagadougou, tens of thousands poured into Independence Square. Miners lifted their tools high. Farmers brought baskets of grain. Students waved banners screaming, "Our gold is our freedom." The mood wasn't anger anymore. It was pride. Neighboring nations felt the impact too. Mali's president declared, "If they seize one of us, they seize all of us." Niger pledged uranium reserves to strengthen the African gold reserve. Guinea announced it would channel mining revenues into the project. What began as a national crisis had become a continental movement. Meanwhile, Western leaders panicked. Trump accused Traoré of selling Africa to the East. European officials scrambled, and analysts fretted over potential economic instability. But their words only reinforced the truth for Africans. The West's fear wasn't about governance or corruption. It was about control. And the realization spread like wildfire. Traoré didn't just react. He doubled down. He spoke directly to the people in a televised address. "They tried to starve us, silence us, divide us. They failed. Our gold is more than metal. It's a symbol of our unity, our independence, our future. We will guard it. Together." Citizens organized neighborhood watches, students patrolled campuses, and military commanders reaffirmed loyalty to the Republic, not to foreign powers. In the global arena, intelligence reports revealed attempts to bribe opposition figures, infiltrate protests, and destabilize Burkina Faso from within. But Traoré's network of journalists and civilian intelligence stayed 2 steps ahead. Every move was tracked. Every threat counted. The West had underestimated Africa's resolve. With the whistleblower's leak and Traoré's leadership, what started as a seizure had turned into a continental awakening. But the next chapter, it would take the fight to a global level, and nothing less than the future of Africa's sovereignty would be at stake. The world thought Burkina Faso's gold seizure would break Africa. They thought fear, sanctions, and intimidation would force the continent to bow. They were dead wrong. By now, Traoré had turned humiliation into a spark that could light the entire Sahel on fire. Figuratively, of course. The idea of the African Gold Reserve had gone from a radical notion to a living, breathing movement. Inside AES summit halls, African leaders leaned in like never before. The whispers of doubt had vanished. Mali pledged uranium, Niger threw its weight behind pooled reserves, and Guinea promised mining revenues. Every nation was suddenly part of something bigger than itself, a united effort to control the continent's own wealth. Traoré stood at the head of the table, the weight of history on his shoulders, but his gaze steady. "This isn't Burkina Faso's gold," he said. "It belongs to Africa, our children's future. No foreign hand touches it. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." On the streets, the energy was electric. Youths painted murals of gold bars breaking chains. Farmers contributed part of their harvests to support the reserve. Students posted viral messages online that spread faster than wildfire. "Keep the gold, build the vault. Africa stands." Even soldiers who had once questioned the plan now stood with the people, pledging loyalty to the Republic. The gold was no longer just metal. It was a symbol, a rallying cry, and a declaration. Africa was taking its future into its own hands. Western governments were losing their minds. Banks in Paris and Brussels tightened the screws, but it didn't matter. Sanctions, trade blockages, and media smear campaigns couldn't undo what was already happening. The whistleblower leak had exposed their coercion, proving beyond doubt that the seizure wasn't legal, it was political. Europe and Washington scrambled to respond, but their power was waning. The narrative had flipped. Africa was no longer on the defensive, it was leading the charge. Meanwhile, BRICS nations quietly reinforced their support. Offers for gold refining technology, direct purchases, and alternative trade routes poured in. Africa had options now. Traoré knew the leverage had shifted. No longer dependent solely on the West, Burkina Faso and its allies could secure wealth, technology, and markets on their own terms. The African Gold Reserve officially began taking shape. Vaults were constructed under military protection, secure zones mapped across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Economists coordinated pooled stocks, engineers oversaw infrastructure, and citizens contributed manpower, resources, and vigilance. What had started as outrage over stolen gold became a blueprint for financial independence and continental unity. Traoré stood before a sea of AES flags at the summit, the weight of generations behind him. "They thought our gold was collateral," he said, voice carrying over the crowd. "It's not collateral. It's freedom. And freedom doesn't beg. It builds. It grows. And together, we will protect it." Applause thundered through the hall and streets alike. The symbol of gold had transformed into a symbol of sovereignty. Africa's oldest treasure, once held hostage by foreign powers, was now safeguarded by Africans. The gold may not have returned immediately, but in its absence, something greater was born. Unity, pride, and the first real steps toward financial self-determination. Miners, farmers, students, and leaders had all played a part. What was meant as humiliation had become a continental awakening. Western powers were left reeling. Trump raged, media warned of instability, and analysts scrambled to understand what had just happened. But for Africa, the awakening was complete. The seizure had failed, not because the gold returned, but because the people refused to bow. They had taken control of their destiny. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just defend gold, he defended Africa's future. What began as a crisis turned into a revolution of thought, a continental pact of unity, and a declaration to the world. Africa will no longer kneel. Freedom, pride, and sovereignty now rise on the continent, built not by outsiders, but by Africans themselves. If this story sparks something in you, share it, carry it, and watch the rise of a new Africa.